They threw her out for getting pregnant and called her a disgrace, but they never imagined she'd build a multi-million-dollar empire and raise twins who would grow up as billionaires. This is the story of how she turned betrayal into power. When her own family cast her into the darkness with nothing but shame and a pregnancy test, they thought they'd destroyed her future. They were wrong. What they actually did was unleash a woman who would revolutionize biotechnology, expose their theft of her groundbreaking research, and watch from her corporate penthouse as they begged for forgiveness that would never come. My name is Harper Lane, and I should have known something was wrong the moment I pulled into my parents' driveway at 6:30 that Friday evening. The porch light wasn't on. Mom always turned it on before guests arrived, even for family. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking any glimpse of the warm yellow glow that usually spilled from the living room windows of their Cedar Grove home. I sat in my Honda Civic for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the house where I'd grown up. Dad's text had been unusually formal. Important family dinner tonight. 6:30 sharp. Don't be late. No emoji. No, love you kiddo, like he usually added. Just cold corporate language that made my stomach twist. At 29, I'd built a decent life for myself as a biomedical data analyst at Novagen Analytics, a mid-sized healthcare tech company in downtown Denver. I had my own apartment, a reliable car, and work that actually mattered, developing algorithms that could save lives. But sitting there in the gathering dusk, I felt like I was 16 again, wondering what I'd done wrong this time. The front door opened before I could knock. Evan, my older brother, stood in the doorway wearing his prosecutor face, the same cold expression he'd perfected in law school and weaponized in courtrooms across Colorado. His wife-to-be, Jessica, hovered behind him like a well-dressed vulture, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching a manila folder. "Harper," Evan's voice carried none of its usual warmth. "Come in. We've been waiting." The living room felt like a tribunal. Mom and Dad sat on opposite ends of the couch, their faces granite hard. The coffee table had been cleared except for a single stack of papers and what looked like printouts of bank statements. The family photos that usually crowded every surface had been turned face down. "Sit." Dad pointed to the armchair across from them, the same chair where I'd been lectured about grades, curfews, and college applications. The defendant's chair. I remained standing. "What's this about?" Jessica stepped forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "Harper, we know this must be difficult, but we can't pretend anymore." She opened the manila folder with theatrical precision. "The evidence is overwhelming." "Evidence of what?" Evan's jaw tightened. "The missing money from Mom and Dad's retirement fund, $23,000, withdrawn in increments over the past 6 months. He slid a bank statement across the coffee table. Always just under the reporting threshold. Very clever. The room tilted. "You think I—" "We don't think." Mom's voice cracked like a whip. "We know. You're the only one with access to our accounts. You've been helping us with the online banking since Dad's surgery. I helped you set up automatic bill payments. I never—" "And then there's this—" Jessica produced her phone, swiping to a photo that made my blood freeze. It was me, coming out of a restaurant downtown, laughing with someone whose face was partially obscured by the angle. "Having intimate dinners with married men. David Reeves from your company. Isn't it the one with 2 young children at home?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. David was my research partner, nothing more. We'd been celebrating a breakthrough in our enzyme detection project work that could revolutionize early cancer screening for pregnant women. But Jessica had cropped the photo to show only me and David, eliminating the rest of our team from the frame. "That was a work dinner," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "The whole research team was there." "Sure it was." Jessica's smile was razor sharp. "Just like all those late nights at the office. Just like all those business trips that seemed to coincide with his schedule." Dad stood up, his face red with shame and anger. "I raised you to be better than this, Harper, to have integrity. But somewhere along the way, You became someone I don't recognize." "Dad, please." "The money was bad enough," he continued, his voice rising, "but destroying a family carrying on with a married man while his wife thinks he's working late?" He shook his head in disgust. "That's not the daughter I raised." I looked around the room desperately, searching for any trace of the family who'd supported me through college, celebrated my first job, bragged about my research to their friends. Instead, I found 4 strangers who'd already decided my guilt. "I never took your money," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. "And David and I are colleagues. Nothing more. If you'd just listen—" "We're done listening." Mom's words fell like a gavel. "We've heard enough lies. We've enabled your behavior for too long, making excuses, hoping you'd change. But this," she gestured at the papers, the photos, the manufactured evidence of my supposed crimes. "This is who you really are." Evan pulled out his phone. "Your things are already packed. I took the liberty of collecting them from your apartment this afternoon." He showed me a photo of cardboard boxes stacked in their garage. "Your landlord was very understanding when I explained the situation." The betrayal was complete, surgical in its precision. They hadn't just accused me, they'd already convicted me, sentenced me, and executed the punishment. My own family had dismantled my life while I was at work, running experiments that might save thousands of lives. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "Dead serious." Dad moved toward the door, clearly expecting me to follow. "You're not welcome here anymore, Harper. Not until you get help and make this right. Maybe someday you'll understand what you've put us through." I walked to their garage in a daze, loaded my hastily packed belongings into my car while my family watched from the doorway like prison guards. Everything I owned, clothes, books, research notes, the framed photo of me winning the state science fair crammed into boxes with all the care of a condemned building demolition. As I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, I caught Evan's satisfied smile in my rearview mirror. He'd orchestrated this perfectly. I realized the timing, the evidence, the coordination with Jessica and my landlord. This wasn't a spontaneous intervention born of concern. This was a calculated destruction designed to look like justice. I had no idea why he wanted me gone, but I was about to find out. I drove for 2 hours without destination, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The Colorado mountains loomed black against the star-scattered sky, and I found myself on Highway 36 heading nowhere in particular. My phone buzzed with texts I couldn't bear to read, voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize, probably Jessica's friends, eager to spread the gossip about my supposed downfall. When my gas tank hit empty, I pulled into the first place I saw the Pine View Motor Inn, a relic from the 1960s with a flickering neon sign and the kind of anonymous desperation that matched my current state. $43 a night. Cash only. No questions asked. The desk clerk barely looked up from his magazine as I handed over 3 crumpled 20s. Room 127 smelled like cigarettes and industrial-strength disinfectant. The brown carpet was stained beyond recognition, and the heater clanked like a dying machine. I sat on the edge of the sagging bed, surrounded by boxes containing my entire life, and tried to process what had just happened. My family, the people who'd raised me, supported me, celebrated every milestone, had not only abandoned me, but actively destroyed my reputation and living situation. They'd coordinated my exile with the precision of a military operation. But why? What could possibly motivate such calculated cruelty? I pulled out my laptop and started scrolling through my recent work files, looking for anything that might explain Evan's involvement. That's when I found it buried in my email trash folder was a message I'd deleted weeks ago without reading carefully. It was from the International Biomedical Research Symposium, confirming Evan Lane as a keynote speaker for their upcoming conference in Chicago. My blood turned to ice. Evan had never done biomedical research in his life. He was a corporate lawyer who specialized in intellectual property disputes. The only way he'd qualify for such a prestigious speaking engagement was if I searched deeper, my fingers flying over the keyboard with growing horror. There it was. Revolutionary Enzyme Detection Protocol for Early Cellular Abnormality Screening in Pregnant Women, listed as his presentation topic. Word for word. It was the title of the research proposal I'd been developing for the past 18 months. The project that had consumed my nights and weekends. The breakthrough that could save thousands of lives by detecting dangerous cellular changes in expecting mothers weeks earlier than current methods allowed. The work I'd been so excited to present to NovaGen's board next month. Evan had stolen it. Somehow, he'd accessed my research and was preparing to present it as his own at one of the most important medical conferences in the world. The speaking fee alone would be 6 figures, not to mention the consulting opportunities and patent potential. I thought about all those times he'd casually asked about my work during family dinners, how interested he'd seemed in my late nights at the lab, how he'd offered to help me back up my files to the cloud for safety. I'd been so proud of his sudden interest in my career that I'd never questioned his motives. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Hope you learned your lesson. Some secrets are worth keeping quiet. E. The threat was clear. He'd destroyed my life to ensure my silence about the theft. If I accused him of stealing my research, who would believe me I was now the disgraced daughter who'd stolen from her elderly parents and broken up a marriage? My credibility was in ruins. I walked to the grimy bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, catching my reflection in the cracked mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed, my usually neat brown hair hanging in tangles. I looked like exactly what they'd painted me as, a woman whose life had spiraled out of control. But then I remembered the small CVS bag I'd shoved into my purse 3 days ago, the purchase I'd been too scared to confront until now. With trembling hands, I retrieved the pregnancy test I'd bought after missing my period for the 2nd month running. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, reading the instructions for the 3rd time, though I already knew them by heart. 3 minutes. 3 minutes to confirm what I already suspected, what my body had been trying to tell me for weeks. The test felt impossibly heavy in my hands as I waited. Through the thin motel walls, I could hear a couple arguing in the next room, a television blaring infomercials, the distant hum of traffic on the highway, normal people living normal lives while mine crumbled around me. 2 pink lines appeared with brutal clarity. Pregnant. I stared at the test until the lines blurred, until my hands stopped shaking, until the reality settled into my bones. I was 29 years old, homeless, jobless by Monday when word of tonight's family meeting inevitably reached my employers, and carrying a child whose father was Aiden Ross, the brilliant, unconventional researcher who'd collaborated with me on the enzyme project. Aiden, who my family had always dismissed as that weird loner because he worked independently instead of for a major corporation. Aiden, who had more scientific integrity in his little finger than Evan had in his entire body. Aiden, who had no idea he was about to become a father because I'd been too scared to tell him about my suspicions. I called him at 11:47 that night, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Harper, his concern was immediate. You sound strange. What's wrong? Everything, I said, and found myself telling him about the family meeting, the accusations, the stolen research, and finally, about the pregnancy test still clutched in my free hand. Silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity. Then, where are you? Some dive motel off Highway 36. I don't even know what town I'm in. Send me the address. I'm coming. Aiden, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was fierce, protective in a way my own family's never was. We're going to figure this out, Harper, all of it. Your brother wants to steal your work and destroy your life. Fine. Let's see how he handles it when we build something he could never dream of taking. As I texted him the motel's location, I felt something shift inside me. The scared, devastated woman who'd fled her family's house was still there, but she was being joined by someone else, someone harder, more determined, someone who'd been underestimated for the last time. I was homeless, pregnant, and betrayed by everyone I'd trusted. But I was also a brilliant scientist with groundbreaking research, a man who believed in me, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Evan had made the mistake of thinking he'd destroyed me. He was about to learn the difference between defeating someone and setting them free. Aiden arrived at 1:15 in the morning, his beat-up Toyota Prius looking almost luxurious next to the motel's flickering vacancy sign. Through the grimy window, I watched him scan the parking lot with the methodical precision he brought to everything, the same careful observation that made him one of the most respected independent researchers in biomedical analytics, even if the academic establishment refused to acknowledge it. He knocked softly, and when I opened the door, his dark eyes immediately assessed my state with clinical concern. Aiden had always been able to read me like data, seeing patterns others missed, understanding correlations that weren't immediately obvious. "Jesus, Harper!" He stepped inside, taking in the shabby room, the boxes stacked like a refugee camp. My red-rimmed eyes. "Are you okay?" Stupid question. Of course you're not okay. I held up the pregnancy test, still clutched in my hand like evidence. 2 lines. Pregnant. With your baby, in case you were wondering. He stared at the plastic stick for a long moment, then looked back at me. "How do you feel about that?" It wasn't the reaction I'd expected. No panic, no demands to know if I was sure, no immediate assumptions about what came next. Just a straightforward question about my feelings, as if my answer actually mattered. Terrified, I admitted. Excited, completely unprepared, all of the above. Aiden nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, if we're doing this, we're doing it together. I'm not going anywhere." The relief nearly knocked me over. "Even though your life is about to get incredibly complicated." My life was already complicated. Now it's complicated with purpose. He gestured toward my laptop, still open to the stolen research files. "Tell me about your brother's little theft operation." I walked him through everything, how Evan had gradually shown interest in my work, how he'd offered to help me back up files, how he'd somehow accessed my research and was now preparing to present it at the International Biomedical Research Symposium, the speaking engagement, the patent potential, the consulting contracts that would follow. 18 months of work, I said, scrolling through my meticulously documented research notes. Every late night, every failed experiment, every breakthrough, he's going to stand on that stage and take credit for all of it. Aiden studied the screen with the intensity he usually reserved for microscopic cellular structures. "The enzyme detection protocol for identifying cellular abnormalities in pregnant women. This is revolutionary work. Harper. The applications for early intervention could save thousands of lives. Which is why I chose to focus on pregnant women specifically. They're understudied, underserved, and most vulnerable to delayed diagnoses." I pulled up my original research proposal, complete with timeline and methodology. I wanted to create something that would actually help people like me. "People like us, now." Aiden's hand instinctively moved toward my still flat stomach, then stopped. "May I?" I nodded, and he placed his palm gently over my abdomen. The gesture was so tender, so full of protective possibility, that I felt tears threatening again. "Your brother made a critical error," Aiden said, his voice taking on the calculating tone he used when solving complex problems. "He stole your research, but he doesn't understand it. Not really. He can present the surface findings, but he can't defend the methodology or expand on the applications. The moment someone asks a detailed question, he's exposed. But by then, it won't matter. He'll have the credit, the patents, the career opportunities. My word against his. And I'm now the family disgrace who supposedly steals money and breaks up marriages." Aiden's eyes sharpened. "Unless we build something better. Something he can't steal because we're already public with it. Something that makes his presentation look like amateur hour." I stared at him. "What are you suggesting?" We start our own research initiative, independent, focused on the populations that major corporations ignore: pregnant women, minorities, People without the resources to participate in traditional clinical trials. He started pacing the small room, his mind clearly racing. We publish our findings open source, patent the processes for humanitarian use only, and build a reputation based on integrity instead of profit. With what funding? What lab space? What credibility? I gestured around the motel room. In case you haven't noticed, I'm not exactly in a position to launch a biotech startup. Actually, you are. Aiden pulled out his phone and showed me a bank account balance that made my eyes widen. 3 years of consulting fees, speaking engagements, and very modest living expenses. I've been saving for something meaningful. This qualifies. The number on the screen was enough to lease lab space, purchase equipment, and cover our living expenses for at least a year. Aiden, I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. This is an investment in our future professional and personal. He sat beside me on the creaky bed. Your research is brilliant, Harper. It deserves to see the light of day under your name, not your brother's. And our child deserves to grow up knowing their mother is a pioneer who changed medicine for the better. I thought about the enzyme detection protocol I'd developed, the potential applications I'd only begun to explore, the thousands of women who could benefit from earlier, more accurate screening. Then I thought about Evan, preparing to claim credit for work that had consumed my life for the past year and a half. What would we call it? I asked. Aiden smiled, the first real smile I'd seen since arriving at this godforsaken motel. That's up to you. It's your vision. I closed my eyes, thinking about the long nights in the lab, the failures that led to breakthroughs, the hope that drove every experiment. When I opened them, the name was there, crystal clear. Lumina Labs, I said, because we're going to bring light to the darkest corners of medical research. We're going to illuminate the problems everyone else ignores. Lumina Labs, Aiden repeated, testing the words. I like it. It sounds like the kind of place that does important work instead of chasing profits. I looked around the dingy motel room that had become the unlikely birthplace of my new life. In less than 12 hours, I'd lost my family, my home, and my job. But I'd also discovered I was pregnant, confirmed that the man I loved was willing to build a future with me, and conceived a plan to reclaim my stolen research while helping the people who needed it most. When do we start? I asked. Tomorrow, Aiden said, but tonight, we sleep. You need rest, and the baby needs you to take care of yourself. He glanced around the shabby room. Though maybe we should find somewhere with better feng shui for the headquarters of a revolutionary biotech company. I laughed, actually laughed for the first time in hours. Aiden Ross, you realize you just committed to starting a company with a homeless pregnant woman in a roadside motel. Harper Lane, he said, pulling me close. I just committed to changing the world with the smartest person I know. The location is irrelevant. As we fell asleep on the lumpy mattress, surrounded by boxes containing the remnants of my old life, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began hope. Evan thought he'd destroyed me by stealing my work and turning my family against me. Instead, he'd freed me to build something extraordinary. 3 months later, I stood in the gleaming lobby of the Denver Innovation Center, my hand instinctively resting on the small bump that was just beginning to show beneath my navy blazer. The Startup Accelerator program had seemed like a long shot when I'd submitted our application. Lumina Labs was still operating out of a converted garage space we'd rented in Boulder, and our team consisted of exactly 2 people and whatever freelance researchers we could afford by the hour. But here I was, clutching a folder containing our pitch deck, about to present to a panel of investors who could provide the $25,000 prize that would legitimize everything we'd built from nothing. You've got this, Aiden whispered beside me, adjusting his one good tie. He'd driven down from Boulder this morning after spending the night calibrating our latest enzyme detection prototype, a device roughly the size of a smartphone that could analyze blood samples in under 10 minutes. The waiting area buzzed with nervous energy from a dozen other startups. To my left, a trio of Stanford graduates in matching polo shirts discussed their cryptocurrency platform. To my right, Two guys who couldn't be older than 22 debated the finer points of their social media analytics dashboard. Then there was me, a 29-year-old pregnant woman with no corporate backing, no prestigious university affiliation, and a research partner the academic establishment considered an outsider. We were developing technology that could save lives, but in a room full of apps and algorithms, life-saving seemed almost quaint. Lumina Labs. A crisp voice called from the conference room entrance. I smoothed my blazer one final time and walked into the most intimidating room I'd ever entered. 5 investors sat behind a mahogany table that could have doubled as a landing strip, their expressions ranging from politely interested to openly skeptical. At the far end sat Dr. Patricia Weber, the venture capitalist who'd built 3 biotech companies from scratch. Her reputation for brilliant investments was matched only by her reputation for brutal honesty. The man in the center, David Morrison, managing partner of Rocky Mountain Ventures, barely looked up from his tablet as I set up our presentation materials. Ms. Lane, I see here that you're developing medical diagnostic equipment. That's unusual for this accelerator program. We typically focus on scalable tech solutions with broader market appeal. The dismissal was subtle but clear. Medical devices meant FDA approval processes, clinical trials, years of testing before generating revenue, not the kind of quick return investment that most accelerators preferred. Actually, Mr. Morrison, our enzyme detection protocol represents exactly the kind of scalable solution you're looking for, I said, clicking to our first slide. We're targeting a market that's been systematically underserved: pregnant women who need earlier, more accurate screening for cellular abnormalities. Dr. Weber leaned forward slightly. And you've developed this technology where, exactly, I don't see any university affiliation or corporate research backing in your materials. Well, we're independent researchers, I said, meeting her gaze steadily. Our lab is in Boulder, and we've been self-funding our work through consulting contracts and personal investment. A younger investor, Jake something or other from a tech-focused fund, glanced pointedly at my growing belly. And how do you plan to manage the demands of a startup while dealing with personal developments? The room went silent. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and I felt every eye in the room cataloging my pregnancy as a liability, a distraction, evidence that I wasn't serious about building a real company. My pregnancy isn't a personal development, I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. It's the reason this technology exists. I'm developing better diagnostic tools because I've experienced firsthand how pregnant women are treated as afterthoughts in medical research. We're not complications to be managed. We're an underserved market worth $40 billion annually. I clicked to our market analysis slide, showing the staggering statistics about delayed diagnoses in pregnant women, the costs associated with complications that could have been prevented with earlier detection, the lawsuit settlements from missed diagnoses that destroyed families. Our prototype can detect cellular abnormalities 3 weeks earlier than current screening methods. I continued, pulling out the device Aiden and I had spent countless nights perfecting. Earlier detection means better outcomes, reduced healthcare costs, and saved lives. The patent applications alone are worth millions. Dr. Weber picked up the device, examining it with the careful attention of someone who understood both the science and the business implications. This is impressive work. The miniaturization of the enzyme detection mechanism is particularly elegant. How did you achieve this level of sensitivity in such a compact design? For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through our methodology, our testing protocols, and our plans for clinical trials. I explained how we'd identified gaps in existing diagnostic technology and developed solutions that were not only more effective but more accessible to women who couldn't afford premium health care. Morrison seemed increasingly engaged, but Jake continued to look skeptical. The technology is interesting, he said, but I'm concerned about execution. Starting a biotech company requires incredible focus and dedication. Are you really prepared for the demands this will place on your time and energy? You mean, am I prepared to work 18-hour days while pregnant and raising a child? I asked. Mr. Patterson, I've been doing exactly that for the past 3 months while building this company from scratch. My pregnancy doesn't make me less capable, it makes me more motivated to create something that matters. Actually, it's Patterson, he corrected with obvious irritation. Of course, I said without missing a beat. As I was saying, Mr. Patterson, single mothers run companies every day. Pregnant women have revolutionized entire industries. The idea that pregnancy disqualifies someone from entrepreneurship is not only outdated, but demonstrably false. Dr. Weber's mouth twitched with what might have been amusement. Walk us through your revenue projections for the next 18 months. I launched into our financial forecasts, explaining how we planned to license our technology to existing medical device companies while building our own manufacturing capabilities. The numbers were conservative but realistic, based on actual market research rather than wishful thinking. When I finished, the room fell silent. Morrison exchanged glances with the other investors, their expressions unreadable. Thank you, Ms. Lane, Dr. Weber said finally. We'll be in touch within 48 hours with our decision. I packed up our materials and walked out of the conference room with as much dignity as I could muster, Aiden falling into step beside me. We didn't speak until we reached the parking garage. Well, he asked. I think I either impressed them or completely alienated them, I said, leaning against his car. Hard to tell which. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it expecting spam, but found something that made my blood freeze. Interesting presentation today. Hope you're prepared for the competition. M.V. Aiden read over my shoulder. Who's M.V.? I stared at the message, my mind racing through possibilities. Then it hit me Marisol Vega. I'd seen her name on the investor list but hadn't connected it to anyone in the room. I think, I said slowly, we just got someone's attention, and I'm not sure if that's good or bad. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a business card photo. Marisol Vega, partner, Biological Innovation Fund. Call me. We need to talk. Whatever happened next, I had the distinct feeling that my presentation had set something in motion that went far beyond a $25,000 prize. For better or worse, Lumina Labs was about to discover what it meant to play in the big leagues. The call from the International Biomedical Research Symposium came on a Tuesday morning while I was calibrating our latest prototype in the Boulder Lab. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the conference director, spoke with the kind of crisp professionalism that suggested she'd already made up her mind before dialing my number. Ms. Lane, we've received your application to present at our Chicago symposium next month. Your enzyme detection work is precisely the kind of innovative research we're looking for. We'd like to offer you a 40-minute presentation slot on the final day. I nearly dropped the delicate testing apparatus I'd been adjusting. The Chicago Symposium was the most prestigious medical research conference in North America. Getting accepted meant validation from the scientific community that our work was legitimate, groundbreaking, and worth international attention. That's incredible, I managed. I'm honored to be selected. The presentation is scheduled for October 15th at 2:30 in the afternoon. Main auditorium, expected audience of 800 researchers and medical professionals. We'll need your final slides submitted by October 10th. After hanging up, I stared at my phone for a full minute before the implications hit me. October 15th, the same day. The same symposium where Evan was scheduled to deliver his keynote address about revolutionary enzyme detection protocol for early cellular abnormality screening. My stolen research. My breakthrough. My life's work that he was preparing to claim as his own in front of the most influential medical minds in the world. The irony was perfect and terrifying. We'd be presenting at the same conference the thief and the victim, the liar and the truth-teller, the golden boy prosecutor and his disgraced sister who'd supposedly stolen from her own family. I called Aiden immediately. We're in, I said when he picked up. Chicago Symposium, October 15th. That's amazing. Harper, when do you present? 2:30 in the afternoon. Main auditorium. I paused, letting the weight of the coincidence settle. Evan's keynote is at 10 in the morning. Same day, same building. Silence stretched across the line. Then, he doesn't know you're presenting. Does he? No way. Conference applications are confidential until the final program is published. He thinks he's going to waltz onto that stage, deliver my research as his own, and collect his standing ovation without anyone questioning the source. What are you going to do? I looked around our makeshift lab, the converted garage space filled with equipment we'd bought secondhand, the whiteboards covered with equations and diagrams that represented months of 18-hour days, the prototype devices that could revolutionize early detection for millions of women. I'm going to tell the truth, I said. All of it. 2 weeks later, I stood in our hotel room in Chicago, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. At 6 months pregnant, there was no hiding my condition, but I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a tailored black dress that emphasized my competence rather than my vulnerability. Professional enough for the medical establishment, but fitted enough to showcase exactly what made my research personal. Aiden adjusted his tie behind me, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what we were about to do. You sure about this approach? Completely. I turned to face him. Evan's counting on me staying silent, playing the role of the disgraced family member who's too ashamed to fight back. He thinks my reputation is so damaged that no one will believe me if I accuse him of theft. And you're about to prove him spectacularly wrong. We arrived at the convention center at 9:45, just 15 minutes before Evan's keynote. The massive lobby buzzed with hundreds of researchers, pharmaceutical executives, and medical professionals, the exact audience that would determine the future of any breakthrough technology. I found a spot near the main auditorium entrance where I'd be visible but not obvious, close enough to watch the audience reactions but far enough away to avoid immediate confrontation. Aiden positioned himself across the lobby with our tablet, ready to livestream whatever happened next. At exactly 10 o'clock, I watched my brother stride onto the stage with the confidence of a man who'd never doubted his right to be there. He looked polished, authoritative, every inch the successful professional our parents had always praised. The massive screen behind him displayed a slide that made my stomach clench. Revolutionary enzyme detection, a new paradigm for maternal health screening. Word for word, it was the title from my original research proposal. Distinguished colleagues, Evan began, his prosecutor's voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium. I'm here today to share breakthrough research that could transform how we approach early detection of cellular abnormalities in pregnant women. He clicked to the next slide my methodology diagram, my experimental design, my months of failed attempts that had led to the final breakthrough. But his narration was subtly wrong, missing crucial details that only the original researcher would know. The enzyme detection protocol utilizes targeted biomarkers to identify cellular changes up to 3 weeks earlier than conventional screening methods, he continued, clearly reading from prepared remarks rather than speaking from deep understanding. A hand shot up in the audience. Dr. Sarah Kim from Johns Hopkins, whose own research I'd cited extensively in my work. Mr. Lane, can you explain the specific enzyme cascade that triggers the detection mechanism? Your methodology seems to suggest a novel approach to enzymatic binding. Evan hesitated for just a moment, barely perceptible unless you were watching for it. The cascade involves a series of targeted enzymatic reactions that amplify the detection signal, he said vaguely, clicking quickly to the next slide. Dr. Kim frowned. But which specific enzymes? The binding affinity must be incredibly precise to achieve the sensitivity you're claiming. The technical details are proprietary pending patent approval, Evan deflected smoothly. But I can assure you the binding mechanisms have been thoroughly tested and validated. It was a reasonable dodge, but I could see skeptical expressions rippling through the audience. Real researchers wanted to understand methodology, not just admire results. For the next 20 minutes, I watched Evan present my life's work with surface-level competence, but none of the passionate understanding that came from actually developing the science. He hit the major points, displayed the impressive results, but couldn't answer the detailed questions that any researcher would face from such an informed audience. When he finished, the applause was polite but not enthusiastic. I could see clusters of researchers immediately huddling together, whispering observations that probably weren't entirely complimentary. Evan stepped off the stage looking satisfied but not triumphant. He'd delivered the presentation without major embarrassment, claimed credit for groundbreaking research, and positioned himself as a leader in maternal health screening technology. He had no idea that in 4.5 hours, I would take the same stage and systematically destroy every lie he'd just told. But first, I had a truth to tell that would make his polished deception look like amateur hour. I pulled out my phone and texted our lab assistant back in Boulder. Release the preliminary findings to the open-source database. Full methodology, raw data, everything. Timestamp it for 11:15 this morning. By the time I took the stage this afternoon, anyone who wanted to verify the true origin of the enzyme detection protocol would be able to find the real research, published under the real researcher's name, with documentation proving I'd been developing this technology long before Evan had ever heard of it. The game was about to change, and my brother had no idea he was about to lose everything. The legal papers arrived at our hotel room at 7:30 the next morning, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic about ruining someone's breakfast. Aiden signed for the thick manila envelope while I sat frozen at the small table, a half-eaten croissant growing cold in front of me. Lane versus Lane, Aiden read from the cover sheet. Defamation, tortious interference with business relations, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He flipped through the pages, his expression growing darker with each paragraph. He's seeking $5 million in damages plus injunctive relief to prevent you from making any further false and defamatory statements about his research. My presentation yesterday had been everything I'd hoped for and more. 800 medical professionals had listened in rapt attention as I walked them through the real development process behind the enzyme detection protocol, the failures that led to breakthroughs, the late nights spent refining methodologies, the personal motivation that drove every experiment. When I'd revealed that the keynote speaker that morning had presented my stolen work, the auditorium had erupted in shocked murmurs. Dr. Sarah Kim had stood up immediately, announcing that she'd suspected something was wrong with the morning presentation based on the presenter's inability to answer basic methodological questions. 3 other researchers had publicly stated they'd be investigating the matter further. By the time I'd finished, Evan's carefully constructed facade had crumbled completely, but apparently he wasn't going down without a fight. $5 million, I repeated, staring at the legal documents, for telling the truth about my own research. It's a slap suit, Aiden said grimly. Strategic litigation against public participation. He's trying to bankrupt us into silence before we can prove the theft. Even if we win eventually, the legal costs could destroy Lumina Labs. I thought about our modest bank account, the equipment we'd bought on credit, the promising investors who might disappear the moment they learned we were embroiled in a family lawsuit. Evan knew exactly what he was doing, using his legal expertise and financial resources to crush us before we could gather momentum. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Ms. Lane, this is Rebecca Martinez from Martinez & Associates. I specialize in intellectual property law, particularly cases involving research theft and patent disputes. I'm not sure I can afford— You can't afford not to have representation, she interrupted. I watched your presentation yesterday, and I've been following the online discussion about your brother's keynote. The scientific community is already rallying behind you, but you need legal protection immediately. Did someone refer you to me? Dr. Marisol Vega. She said you might need help with what she called the inevitable backlash from exposing a fraud. She was right. Marisol again. The mysterious investor who'd been shadowing our progress since the Denver accelerator. I still wasn't sure if she was an ally or something more complicated, but right now I needed all the help I could get. What would representation cost? For a case like this, normally, $200,000 minimum, but Dr. Vega has offered to cover all legal expenses as part of her investment in Lumina Labs. She's also connected me with 3 other researchers who've had their work stolen by family members. Apparently, It's more common than anyone wants to admit. I looked at Aiden, who nodded emphatically. When can we meet? How about now I'm in the hotel lobby? Rebecca Martinez was a small woman with steel gray hair and the kind of intense focus that suggested she'd built her career on cases everyone else considered unwinnable. She spread the legal documents across our hotel room table like a general planning a battle campaign. Your brother made several tactical errors, she said, highlighting specific paragraphs with surgical precision. First, he filed in Colorado State Court, which has strong protections for whistleblowers exposing research fraud. Second, he's claiming ownership of work that you've now published with full documentation of your development process. Third, he's demanding damages for reputation harm caused by truthful statements. So we can beat this. We can do better than beat it. We can turn it into a weapon. Rebecca pulled out her laptop and showed us a legal document she'd already prepared. Countersuit for research theft, copyright infringement, fraud, and violations of the Colorado Whistleblower Protection Act. We're seeking return of all profits from his presentation, disgorgement of any consulting contracts he's signed based on your work, and punitive damages for intentional misconduct. Aiden leaned forward. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Fast track. Judge Patricia Williamson is hearing the case. She has a reputation for moving quickly on intellectual property disputes, especially when there's clear evidence of fraud. I'm requesting an expedited hearing based on the ongoing harm to Ms. Lane's professional reputation. I stared at the countersuit papers, thinking about the moment 6 months ago when my family had cast me out with nothing but accusations and shame. They'd counted on my silence, my embarrassment, my desire to avoid confrontation. Instead, they'd created someone with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. There's something else, Rebecca continued. I've been researching your brother's recent career moves. 3 months ago, he joined Meridian Legal as a partner, specializing in intellectual property law for biotech companies. His client list includes several major pharmaceutical corporations who would be very interested in enzyme detection technology. The implications hit like a physical blow. He wasn't just stealing my research for conference glory. He was positioning himself to profit from it professionally. Exactly. And get this, Meridian Legal has been aggressively pursuing patents related to maternal health screening. If your brother could present himself as the innovator behind breakthrough detection technology, he'd be worth millions to any pharma company looking to dominate that market. Aiden's jaw tightened. He orchestrated the entire family intervention to silence Harper before she could expose the theft, destroy her credibility, isolate her from support systems, ensure that no one would believe her if she tried to reclaim her work. But he underestimated her, Rebecca said with satisfaction. The scientific community doesn't care about family drama. They care about innovation and integrity. Dr. Lane has both, and your brother has neither. I signed the countersuit papers with hands that barely shook. 6 months ago, I'd been a frightened woman fleeing her family's condemnation with nothing but a pregnancy test and a stolen car full of belongings. Now I was the CEO of a biotech company, carrying twins who would grow up knowing their mother had never backed down from a fight, preparing to take on a legal system that protected thieves as long as they were family. When do we file? I asked. This afternoon, Rebecca replied. Judge Williamson has agreed to hear preliminary motions next week. Your brother wanted a legal war. She smiled with predatory satisfaction. He's about to get one. The Denver District Courthouse felt like a cathedral built for justice, all marble columns and soaring ceilings that made individual human dramas seem both insignificant and monumentally important. I sat at the plaintiff's table at 9:15 on a crisp November morning, 7 months pregnant and wearing the same black dress I'd chosen for my Chicago presentation, my armor for battles that mattered. Rebecca Martinez arranged our evidence with the methodical precision of someone who'd never lost a case she believed in. Beside me, Aiden squeezed my hand as we watched Evan enter with his legal team 3 attorneys from Meridian Legal, who looked like they charged more per hour than most people made in a month. Judge Patricia Williamson took the bench exactly at 9:30, her silver hair pulled back severely and her expression suggesting she had no patience for anything resembling theatrics. She'd built her reputation handling complex intellectual property disputes with the efficiency of a surgeon and the integrity of someone who'd never been bought. Lane versus Lane, she announced, reviewing the case file. This is a hearing on cross motions for summary judgment regarding allegations of research theft, defamation, and violations of whistleblower protection statutes. Ms. Martinez, you may proceed. Rebecca stood with the kind of quiet confidence that came from having the truth on her side. Your Honor, this case represents a clear-cut example of intellectual property theft between family members. The defendant systematically appropriated the plaintiff's 18 months of groundbreaking biomedical research, presented it as his own work at an international symposium, and then attempted to silence the victim through strategic litigation. She clicked a remote, and the courtroom's large screen displayed my original research proposal, complete with timestamps and digital signatures. The plaintiff, Dr. Harper Lane, began developing enzyme detection protocols for maternal health screening in January of last year. Every stage of her research is meticulously documented through laboratory notes, digital files, and peer consultation records. The evidence was overwhelming and beautifully presented, month by month. Rebecca walked the judge through my development process, the initial hypothesis, the failed experiments that led to refinements, the breakthrough moments that had consumed my nights and weekends. Each piece of documentation was time-stamped, verified, and corroborated by multiple sources. In contrast, Rebecca continued, the defendant has no research background in biomedical applications, no laboratory access, and no credible explanation for how he allegedly developed identical technology using identical methodologies. She displayed Evan's presentation from Chicago, highlighting the sections that were word-for-word identical to my original research proposals. The defendant's only evidence of independent development consists of vague consulting contracts and presentation materials that post-date the plaintiff's documented work by over a year. Evan's lead attorney, a sharp-faced man named Davidson, rose for his response with the kind of aggressive confidence that suggested he'd built his career on intimidation rather than facts. Shh, Your Honor, my client is a respected intellectual property attorney who collaborates with numerous researchers in developing patent applications. The plaintiff's accusations are nothing more than a family dispute disguised as legitimate legal action. Davidson gestured toward me dismissively. Ms. Lane was terminated from her position at NovaGen Analytics for misconduct and has since struggled to establish professional credibility. Her allegations against my client represent a desperate attempt to salvage a failed career by attacking a successful family member. The lies rolled off his tongue so smoothly that I almost admired the technique. Almost. Furthermore, Davidson continued, the plaintiff's presentation in Chicago was motivated by personal vendetta rather than legitimate scientific discourse. She deliberately chose to humiliate my client in a public forum rather than pursue appropriate legal channels for resolving any perceived intellectual property disputes. Judge Williamson looked up from the evidence files. Mr. Davidson, I've reviewed the documentation submitted by both parties. Can you provide any evidence that your client conducted independent research into enzyme detection protocols? Sir, Your Honor, the specific methodologies are proprietary and protected by attorney-client privilege. That's not what I asked. The judge's voice carried the kind of authority that ended arguments instantly. I'm asking for basic evidence of research activity, laboratory notes, experimental data, consultation records, anything that would support independent development of this technology. Davidson shuffled through his papers, clearly stalling. Your Honor, my client's work involves synthesizing research from multiple sources to develop commercially viable applications. Mr. Davidson, Judge Williamson interrupted. Are you telling this court that your client has no documentation of independent research because he didn't conduct any independent research? The courtroom fell silent. Davidson's polished confidence cracked just enough to reveal the panic underneath. Your Honor, I need to consult with my client. You've had 3 weeks to prepare for this hearing. Either you have evidence or you don't. I watched Evan whisper urgently to his attorney, his face flushed with the kind of desperation I'd never seen from my always composed older brother. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked like what he actually was, a man who'd been caught stealing and was running out of lies. Your Honor," Rebecca interjected. "We'd like to submit additional evidence that directly addresses the question of independent research." She approached the bench with a tablet showing email correspondence we'd uncovered during discovery. "These are messages between the defendant and his colleagues at Meridian Legal, discussing acquisition of breakthrough biotech innovations and leveraging family connections for proprietary research access. The dates correspond exactly with the period when the defendant was supposedly conducting his own independent research." Judge Williamson reviewed the emails with the expression of someone who'd seen every variety of human corruption and still found new ways to be disappointed. When she looked up, her gaze fixed on Evan with laser precision. "Mr. Lane, please stand." Evan rose unsteadily, his confident demeanor completely shattered. Based on the evidence presented," Judge Williamson continued, "this court finds that you systematically appropriated your sister's intellectual property, misrepresented it as your own work, and then attempted to silence her legitimate claims through intimidation litigation." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the courtroom. "The plaintiff's research is clearly documented, extensively corroborated, and represents genuine scientific innovation. Your presentation of identical work lacks any credible explanation beyond theft." My hands trembled as I realized what was happening. After months of legal warfare, financial stress, and family destruction, the truth was finally being acknowledged by someone with the power to enforce it. Therefore, this court grants summary judgment in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. Mr. Lane, you are permanently enjoined from using, presenting, or claiming ownership of Dr. Lane's enzyme detection protocols. You will cease all consulting activities based on the disputed research and disgorge any profits derived from the plaintiff's intellectual property. Judge Williamson's gavel fell with the finality of justice served. Furthermore, this court finds that your defamation suit constitutes strategic litigation designed to silence a legitimate whistleblower. You will pay the plaintiff's legal fees and face sanctions for abuse of the legal process." Evan slumped into his chair like a man whose entire world had just collapsed, which, I realized, was exactly what had happened. Justice, it turned out, was even sweeter than revenge. The call came at 2:47 on a Thursday afternoon, 3 hours after Judge Williamson's gavel had sealed Evan's fate and vindicated everything I'd sacrificed to reach this moment. I was sitting in Rebecca's law office, still processing the magnitude of our victory, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Dr. Lane, this is Marisol Vega." The mysterious investor who'd been orchestrating support from the shadows finally revealed herself with perfect timing. "I've been following your legal proceedings with great interest," she continued, "and I think it's time we discussed Lumina Labs' future in concrete terms." "What did you have in mind?" $5 million. Series A funding to establish your research as the gold standard for maternal health screening. Full autonomy over research direction, patent ownership, and company governance. Are you interested? I stared at Aiden, who'd been listening to the conversation with growing amazement. $5 million would transform Lumina Labs from a garage startup into a legitimate biotech company capable of changing medicine forever. Why, I asked, why invest in us specifically? Marisol's laugh carried years of hard-won wisdom. Because 23 years ago, my research was stolen by a male colleague who presented it at a conference while I was on maternity leave. I spent 5 years fighting to reclaim credit and lost everything: my position, my funding, my reputation. I've been waiting for someone like you ever since. Someone like me? Someone who fights back. Someone who refuses to let theft and intimidation define their legacy. Someone who turns betrayal into power and builds something extraordinary from the ashes of family destruction. Within an hour, Marisol arrived at the law office with a team of advisors and a funding agreement that read like an entrepreneur's fantasy. No crushing equity requirements, no micromanagement clauses, no attempts to push me aside once the company became profitable. just partnership with someone who understood exactly what I'd endured and what I was capable of achieving. There's one condition, Marisol said as we reviewed the final documents. I want you to tell your story. The whole story, the family betrayal, the stolen research, the legal battle, everything. Other women need to see that fighting back is possible. You want me to go public about the family drama? I want you to go public about the systemic theft of women's intellectual property that happens every day in research institutions, corporations, and families across this country. Your story isn't just personal, it's political. 6 months later, I stood on the stage at the annual Women in Science Leadership Conference, 8.5 months pregnant with twins who seemed determined to make their debut before my presentation ended. The audience of 1,200 researchers, entrepreneurs, and academics listened with rapt attention as I walked them through the journey from family exile to biotech CEO. They threw me out for getting pregnant and called me a disgrace, I said, my hands resting on my enormous belly. But they never imagined I'd build a multi-million-dollar empire and raise children who would grow up knowing their mother never backed down from a fight. The applause was thunderous, but the real validation came afterward. Dozens of women approaching me with their own stories of stolen research, suppressed innovations, and family members who'd tried to claim credit for their work. The epidemic of intellectual property theft targeting women was far worse than anyone wanted to acknowledge. 3 weeks later, Lumina Labs announced our first major breakthrough, a handheld device capable of detecting 12 different cellular abnormalities in pregnant women with 97% accuracy. The technology that Evan had tried to steal was now saving lives across 3 continents, with Aiden and me holding every patent and controlling every application. The media coverage was everything Marisol had predicted. Forbes featured me on their cover as the pregnant CEO who revolutionized medical diagnostics. Harvard Business Review published a case study about turning family betrayal into entrepreneurial motivation. The New York Times ran a feature about the growing number of women fighting back against research theft. But the moment that mattered most came on a quiet Sunday morning when my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in almost 2 years. Mom's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. Harper. Her voice was smaller than I remembered, tentative in a way that suggested she'd been rehearsing this conversation for months. I saw the Forbes article, and the court ruling, and everything. And I owe you an apology that I'll never be able to fully give. We believed lies because they were easier than admitting we'd raised someone capable of such manipulation. She paused, breathing shakily. Evan confessed everything after the judge's ruling, the money he stole from our retirement fund to pay Jessica's debts, the way he accessed your research files, how he convinced us you were the problem when he was destroying our family from the inside. I looked across our new laboratory space, 15,000 square feet of cutting-edge equipment funded by investors who believed in our vision and felt something that might have been forgiveness beginning to grow. I know I don't deserve it, Mom continued, but could we maybe start over? I'd like to meet my grandchildren when they arrive. 2 months later, I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl who entered the world as heirs to a biotech empire built on principles their mother had learned the hard way. As I held them in the hospital room, surrounded by Aiden, Marisol, Rebecca, and yes, my parents, I realized that Evan's betrayal had given me something more valuable than the family approval I'd once craved. It had given me the power to create my own legacy. Today, Lumina Labs employs over 200 researchers working on innovations that prioritize underserved populations. Our enzyme detection technology has prevented thousands of pregnancy complications. The twins, now toddlers who treat our laboratory like their personal playground, are growing up in a world where their mother's name is synonymous with scientific integrity and entrepreneurial courage. Evan, for what it's worth, lost his partnership at Meridian Legal and now works as a public defender in rural Montana. We don't speak, but I heard he's actually good at the job, perhaps finding redemption in protecting people who can't protect themselves. As for me, I'm exactly where I was always meant to be, leading breakthrough research. raising children who'll never doubt their worth, and proving every day that the best revenge is building something so extraordinary that your enemies become footnotes in your success story. Thank you for listening to my journey from family exile to entrepreneurial triumph. I hope my story inspires you to never accept other people's limitations on your potential, whether they come from strangers or the people who should love you most. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with fellow fighters and dreamers around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories of turning betrayal into power, and share your thoughts about overcoming the obstacles that others put in your path.